arithmetic comparison. Absolutely. Now, let's talk about the program that Israel haters use to push their agenda onto an unsuspecting public and how they hide the real goal behind fake human rights language. And of course, we are talking about the BDS movement. Now, BDS stands for Boycotts, Divestment, and Sanctions Aimed at Israel, couched in the language of human rights. Now, one of the leading targets of BDS over the years has been SodaStream, which is a fairly high-profile company. You may remember Scarlett Johansson's Super Bowl ads a few years ago. Now, as you may recall, the sin in the minds of the BDSers of SodaStream was having a factory located across the Green Line, so in occupied territory. And SodaStream was notable for employing Palestinian Arabs, non-citizens, at Israeli wages and benefits, much better than they could get, in their local economy. And it was a real oasis of coexistence between the Jewish and the Arab workers. Now, under pressure because of this, SodaStream relocated its factory to the Negev, just south of Beersheba, big factory there. Do you think BDS stopped trying to target SodaStream because of that? Absolutely not, because now it's on land stolen from the Bedouins. Now, you can correctly surmise that if BDS managed, if SodaStream managed to find a location for its factory in Tel Aviv, which was completely empty, uninhabited sand dunes prior to 1909, somehow the BDS movement would still find some reason to try to boycott it. Now, you have to understand where BDS came from. BDS was born at the United Nations conference in Durban, South Africa in August of 2001, which was ironically called the UN Conference on Racism. It featured organized hate demonstrations like this. It also featured a sidebar conference of non-governmental organizations, groups like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and other NGOs that did pass a program calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions aimed against Israel. This rapidly faded from the headlines, though, because when this conference took place was the last week of August and first week of September in 2001, and events shortly after that completely wiped this out of the public mind. But you have to understand that this, what you're seeing here, is the toxic stew of hate that gave birth to BDS. Now, BDS has 3 specific demands, and these are encompassed in a 2005 document called the BDS Call. You can look it up, because Palestinian groups first came out in 2004 with a call for an academic and cultural boycott of Israel, and then for a full-fledged BDS program in 2005. So that document, the BDS Call, has 3 demands. Number 1, ending its colonization and occupation of all Arab lands and dismantling the wall, recognizing the fundamental rights of the Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. Now let's unpack these a little bit, because you really need to understand how they basically hide their goals behind this fake human rights language. Now let's look at the first one. What constitutes all Arab lands? Are they talking about just Gaza and the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, depending on how you want to refer to it? Or are they talking about all of Israel? I mean, after all, the Hamas charter states very clearly the Islamic resistance movement, that's Hamas, believes that the land of Palestine is an Islamic waqf, a trust, consecrated for future Muslim generations until Judgment Day. It or any part of it should not be squandered. It or any part of it should not be given up. And if you look at the BDS Call and look at the signatories on it, the first group that's a signatory is the Council of National and Islamic Forces in Palestine, a group that includes Hamas, as well as Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other terror groups. And I'm just going to take a guess that Hamas is probably a more influential group in this than many of the dozens of other NGOs that are listed as signing on to the BDS Call, such as the Union of Palestinian Farmers, which may not be more than a P.O. box at Ramallah's equivalent of the UPS store. Now, second demand, recognizing the fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. Yes, I agree, absolutely. All of Israel's citizens should have equal rights under the law. But they do. Arab citizens of Israel have equal rights to vote. They have equal civil rights, and they have equal rights to petition the courts to uphold those rights. Arab citizens have been represented in every single Knesset since Israel's founding. And so it's, again, vague. What kind of equality are they talking about? Are they perhaps suggesting that the 25% or 23% of Israel's population that is Arab should have an equal say in the running of the country to the overwhelming majority of the population, which is Jewish? Should an Arab's vote be worth 3 times as much of a Jew's? And wouldn't that perhaps be unequal rather than equal? So again, they're being very deliberately vague here. Now, can Israel's Arab towns receive better funding, and can their socioeconomic status be improved? And can steps be taken to end the racism that exists in Israel, like, as I said, exists in every country in the world? Absolutely. But given the situation of Arabs across the Middle East, an Arab citizen of Israel has far more rights and is far better off economically than most of her fellow Arabs in the region, as well as not being subjected to legally tolerated honor killings and female circumcision. But finally, we get to the heart of the issue, just as it is every time the Israel haters open their mouths. And that's the non-existent right of return for descendants of Palestinian refugees, refugees created by the failed Arab attempt to annihilate Israel at its birth. And in this, the BDS movement gives up any pretense that it's about peaceful coexistence. It's just another tactic in their ongoing refusal to accept the existence of the Jewish state. And this is where BDSers get exposed. Essentially, it's the same old BS, hold the D. It's the Hamas river to the sea agenda dressed up in fancier language. Because what the goal of this is to change Israel demographically from the state of the Jewish people into a so-called binational state. Now, if you like what's going on in Ukraine, in Iraq, if you like what happened in Rwanda, if you really enjoy what happened in Syria, then you'll love the binational state of Jews and Arabs who have been at war now for decades in this single binational state. Now, it's also important to note that what they cite is UN Resolution 194. And it was passed by the United Nations General Assembly. And for those of you who did not do Model UN in high school or college, General Assembly resolutions are not binding. They're not even binding on the states that voted for it, much less the states that voted against it. And in this particular instance, all of the Arab states voted against it because of other clauses in the resolution recognizing Israel's right to exist free of attacks. And the paragraph that deals with refugees, I put up there in its entirety, okay, resolves that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practical date, and goes on and talks about compensation. Now, I have a standing bet that I'll give anybody $1,000 if they can find the word right anywhere in that paragraph. It doesn't exist. But this is the source that the BDS movement and other anti-Israel people use to claim a fictional right of return, not only for the refugees who fled as a result of the war between Israel and the Arabs in 47 and 48, but for all of their descendants. And there is in international refugee law, there actually is such a thing as a right of return for refugees themselves, not descendants, at the conclusion of the conflict. But I don't think anybody on either side is pretending that the conflict between Israel and the Arabs is at a conclusion. Now, again, as I said, they try to hide this in human rights language, but sometimes the language of liberalism slips and they end up with the jargon of jihad. And I want to show you some quotes here. The ones on the left are from a woman named Lara Kiswani, who's the director of the Arab Resource Organizing Center in San Francisco, a very extremist, hostile organization. And these were remarks she made at UC Berkeley about 4 to 5 years ago when the Grad Students Union was considering a resolution endorsing BDS. So bringing down Israel will really benefit everyone in the world and everyone in society, particularly workers. I think you should boycott any Zionist institution, academic organization, whether it be from 1967 occupied Palestine or 1948 occupied Palestine. She's showing that in her mind, there is no difference at all between Tel Aviv and Ma'aleh Adumim and a settlement up on Highway 60 in the heart of the West Bank. As far as she's concerned, it's all occupied and all illegitimate. But at least she was honest at the end and said, as long as you choose to be on that side, I'm going to hate you. Now, the screenshot on the right was from UC Davis, and this was posted by a student senator who wrote a BDS resolution for the student government, and she posted this right after the student government passed that. Now, fortunately, the university administration about 2.2 seconds later said, no, we're not doing any divestment. But I want to bring your attention to the language that she used. You can't read it from here, but what it says is, Hamas and Sharia law have taken over UC Davis. Think about that. Hamas and Sharia law have taken over UC Davis. This is not somebody on our side accusing them of fronting for Hamas and Islamism. This is somebody admitting that this is what the agenda was. And it's interesting now that there's actually one court case at least that's going on in a U.S. district court, I believe from the Arizona Attorney General with regard to Arizona's anti-BDS legislation, detailing ties between BDS organizations here and terror organizations operating in the territories against Israel. And this really, if it is substantiated, would not be a shock to any of us who've been observing this. Now, is BDS causing economic harm to Israel? No. Thanks to the high-tech sector, the economy is booming. Israel had record levels of tourism last year. I was very delighted to be contributing to that record level of tourism. And while BDS tries to oppose normalization on campuses, which means accepting Jewish students who are pro-Israel into any activities at all, the Arab world is slowly normalizing its relations with Israel. Another Muslim country, Chad, just today reestablished diplomatic relations with Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Oman very recently, and there are rumors that Bahrain is about to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. But what BDS does do is it intimidates young Jews from standing up for our own identity, our own history, and our own people. And it's not a surprise that there is a strong correlation on campuses across the country between BDS and, frankly, anti-Semitic activity. Jewish students having epithets hurled at them, Hillels and Jewish fraternities being vandalized. There is a very strong statistical correlation with all.